Ever woken up in the middle of the night, unable to move, unable to scream, but fully aware? You feel a presence. Something or someone at the foot of your bed. Watching, waiting, moving closer. This is not just a bad dream. It's sleep paralysis. And millions of people around the world report the exact same terrifying experience. From Vietnam to Mexico, from Iceland to Nigeria, people who've never met, who speak different languages, tell the same chilling story. How is that possible? And more importantly, what if it's not just a dream? 1. The White Shadow in Hoi An. A girl named Hang, 26 years old, lived in Hoi An, Vietnam, a city famous for its ancient beauty, but also a place where chilling stories are whispered, stories that few dare to speak of. She had become accustomed to the quiet nights, the distant sounds of insects chirping outside her window, and the faint scent of jasmine tea carried on the breeze. But one summer evening in 2019, everything changed in a way that would haunt her forever. After a long day working at a cafe, Hong returned home exhausted, barely able to stand. She collapsed into bed without changing clothes, simply pulling the blanket over her. The nightlight in her room flickered dimly, casting a weak glow as if it was struggling to stay on. Within moments, her tired body succumbed to sleep. However, around midnight, something unsettling stirred her awake. She couldn't move. She couldn't scream. Her body felt stiff, as though it were made of stone, and her eyes darted around in sheer panic. A coldness filled the room, as if the very air had become thick and oppressive, and something was there with her, something unseen. Suddenly, she sensed it. A faint white shadow dressed in a white ao dye, with long hair falling over its face, was standing with its back turned. The figure was blurred, yet its presence was unmistakable. The cold in the room grew heavier, as though all the warmth had been sucked away, leaving only a suffocating, unnatural chill. Hung's heart raced in her chest, her thoughts frantic. How did it get into my room? But her voice was trapped, her limbs frozen. She could only stare in terror at the pale figure. Then something truly horrifying happened. The white shadow began to turn its head not like a normal person, but with a sickening, unnatural twist. Its head rotated 180 degrees with a horrifying crack, like bones snapping. Its eyes were pure white empty, devoid of pupil sand. Its mouth opened wide in a grotesque, unnatural grin. The smile spread unnaturally across its face, showing rows of sharp, jagged teeth, too many to be human. Hung's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't tear her gaze away. As the figure began to glide forward, not walking, but sliding silently across the floor, leaving no sound, it moved closer and closer. With each inch, the temperature in the room dropped further, and the feeling of dread grew stronger. When the shadow was mere inches from Hung's face, she could feel its icy breath, colder than ice, colder than anything she had ever felt before. Her skin tingled with the sensation of freezing, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. A putrid stench filled her nose like the scent of rotting flesh, the odor of decay as though it had just crawled out of a grave. The shadow leaned in closer, its mouth hovering right over Hung's ear. She could hear its voice, but it wasn't words just, a low, whispering hum that sent chills down her spine. Then, with one final horrifying motion, its cold breath brushed across her skin, and everything around her went black. The next morning, Hong woke up, her body still frozen, as if she had been trapped in a nightmare. The room was silent, still, as if nothing had happened. But when she touched her neck, she froze in terror. There were bruises, dark marks on her skin, as if someone had gripped her throat with an iron fist. They were clear, unmistakable imprints of fingers, dark and swollen. Confused and frightened, Hong rushed to the mirror, but as she looked at her reflection, something was wrong. Her face was pale, her eyes darkened, and the bruises were now visible not just on her neck but also on her face. Her pupils were dilated, the whites of her eyes completely missing. There was someone lurking behind her reflection, something that shouldn't have been there. The room felt heavier, more suffocating. Her pulse quickened as she turned away from the mirror, but when she glanced out the window, she saw it, the white shadow. It was standing outside, beneath the tree in front of her house, staring at her with those empty, hollow eyes. Hung couldn't escape it. No matter how far she ran, no matter how fast she tried to get away, the shadow was always there, lurking, waiting. She never returned to that room again, but each night, as she tried to sleep, she could feel its presence, lingering, just out of reach. The marks on her body never healed. And every time she closed her eyes, she felt the cold breath of the shadow drawing near. She had thought it was gone, but she was wrong. The white shadow was always there, and it would never leave. 2. The Man of Shadows. Luis, a 32-year-old man, lived in Mexico City, a sprawling metropolis with an undeniable mix of old-world charm and modern chaos. He had always been a rational person, never given to superstition or the supernatural. But growing up, he often heard stories from his grandmother about a figure known as El Hombre de Sombras, the Man of Shadows. She would speak of him in hushed tones, warning him to never be alone at night, to never stray too far from the safety of the light. Luis thought it was just an old folk tale, a legend meant to scare children, until the night he encountered it himself. One evening, after a long shift at work, Luis collapsed on his sofa, too tired to make it to his bed. His eyes grew heavy, and despite the exhaustion weighing him down, he fell into a deep, restless sleep. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, the time creeping towards 2:47 a.m. In the midst of his dreams, something jolted him awake. He opened his eyes, and the first thing he saw was the ceiling above him, dotted with shadows that seemed to stretch and shift unnaturally. It felt as though the room itself was breathing. But there, in the corner of the room, where the streetlight's glow couldn't quite reach, something was different. One shadow did not dissipate like the others. It lingered, stubborn, unmoving, ominous. Luis tried to sit up, his heart hammering in his chest, but his body felt frozen. His mouth went dry, his pulse quickening as he stared at the shape in the corner. It was a figure, a man, tall, unnaturally so. His silhouette was cloaked in darkness, with a wide-brimmed hat that obscured his face. Luis's eyes strained, but he couldn't make out any details other than the unmistakable presence of a person. He tried to scream, he tried to move, but nothing happened. His voice caught in his throat, his body was paralyzed, as if a cold, invisible hand had gripped him, holding him captive. The figure remained still, watching, waiting. Then, without warning, the shadow began to move. It didn't walk. It didn't even glide. It slid. It moved along the wall like a ghost, its form bending and twisting in ways that defied all logic. It didn't make a sound, not a single creak of the floorboards, not a whisper of movement. It was as if it were nothing more than an apparition, a thing that didn't belong in this world. Luis's breathing became erratic as the figure drew closer. As it approached him, his skin crawled with an icy chill that seeped into his very bones. He could feel the temperature in the room drop, the air thickening as though something unnatural was invading his space. The figure stopped when it was right above him, leaning down so close that Luis could smell the foul stench of decay, like something long dead. It whispered. The words were incomprehensibilian, ancient like a language that didn't belong to any human tongue. The sound was like nails scraping against a chalkboard, like something from the depths of hell. Luis felt the words pierce his mind, and his vision blurred, his senses overwhelmed by the horror of the moment. Then everything went dark. The room, the figure, the whispers, everything disappeared in an instant. Luis awoke sometime later, his body drenched in cold sweat, his heart still racing. The room was as silent as it had been before, but something was different. His body ached, and there was a sharp, burning sensation on his chest. He looked down, his breath catching in his throat. There, on his bare chest, were the unmistakable marks of 5 fingers-deep charred burns, like the imprint of a hand that had pressed into his skin with searing heat. The burns were still smoking, the skin around them tender and raw, as if they had been inflicted mere moments ago. Luis shot out of bed, panicked, searching the room with frantic eyes. The shadow was gone. but the feeling of its presence lingered, thick and suffocating. His mind raced, replaying the image of the tall figure in the corner, the whispers that had torn through his soul. Had it been real? Had he imagined it? Or was it the thing his grandmother had warned him about? He never slept soundly again. No matter how hard he tried to forget, the feeling of that cold, suffocating presence haunted him. The burnt marks on his chest never fully healed, always a reminder of the night he encountered El Hombre de Sombras. And somewhere, in the darkest corners of his mind, he knew that the shadow was still out there waiting for the next time the lights went out. 3. The Blind Monster. Freya, a 19-year-old girl, lived in the rural countryside of Iceland. Her home was situated near a region long whispered about by the locals, a place where a terrible famine once ravaged the land, where the souls of the hungry were said to still wander. These were the stories passed down through generations, but Freya never believed them. That was until one winter night, when everything she thought she knew was shattered in a way that would haunt her for the rest of her life. It was the middle of winter, and the snow had piled up thick against the windows, casting the world outside in an eerie, frozen silence. Freya had gone to bed early, her body weary from a long day of work. The chill in the air made the house creak, and the wind howled outside. As she lay in the darkness, drifting into sleep, she felt the weight of something strange settling over her. Suddenly, she awoke. Her body was frozen, unable to move, as if some invisible force held her in place. Her heart began to race, and her breath quickened. She couldn't scream, couldn't even twitch a finger. The room was dark, but she could feel the presence of something sinister in the air. Then, she heard Ito whisper, soft, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. Egse chig, I see you. The voice was hollow, void of emotion, like it came from somewhere deep in the earth. Freya's eyes darted around the room, but she could see nothing, just the oppressive darkness pressing in from every corner. She tried to scream, to call out, but the words wouldn't form. Her lips trembled in silence as the voice continued, sending cold shivers down her spine. Egse sing. The voice was closer now. She strained to listen, and then she heard it, the unmistakable sound of bare feet dragging across the cold wooden floor. The slow, deliberate steps echoed through the silence of the room, the sound of skin scraping against the floor like a sickening, unsettling noise. It was as though something was moving toward her, something with no regard for the rules of nature. It was crawling now, slithering. The air grew colder. A rank, musty scent filled her nose, like the stench of decay. Then she heard it, the heavy, rasping breath of something that didn't belong. It wasn't the sound of a person, but of something blind. Freya's heart pounded in her chest as the creature finally emerged from the shadows. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, thing with no eyes, its skin an unnatural pale, like the color of death. Its face was twisted in an agonizing grimace, and its mouth hung open, stretched wide in a grotesque, unnatural shape. It was moving like an insect, crawling on both its hands and feet in a spider-like motion, its body contorting in ways that were too unnatural to be real. Freya wanted to scream, but her throat was tight, her voice choked by fear. She could only watch as the creature approached her bed, its twisted body scraping against the walls as it climbed higher and higher, until it was standing right above her. Its head brushed against the ceiling, as if it had no care for the space it occupied. And then, it leaned in. Freya could feel its presence, its breath hot and foul against her face. She could hear it sniffing, inhaling deeply, like a predator scenting its prey. The air grew thick with the smell of something rotten, like the stench of death itself. The creature's face was now inches from hers, its breath hot and putrid on her skin. Then it opened its mouth even wider. At first, Freya thought she had seen teeth, but as the mouth stretched wider, she realized the horrible truth. There were no teeth. Instead, inside its mouth hundreds, maybe thousands soft eyes. Tiny, blinking eyes, moving independently of each other, shifting in every direction, their pupils dilating and contracting like a swarm of insects. The eyes stared at Freya, unblinking, relentless. They weren't just in its mouth, they were everywhere. They filled the creature's throat, its cheeks, its skull, countless eyes that seemed to look into her very soul. Her mind couldn't process what she was seeing. She could only feel the overwhelming sense of terror closing in on her. Her breath caught in her throat, her heart racing faster than ever. The creature's eyes blinked faster, each one seeming to pierce her, invade her mind. And then, her body finally gave way. Freya blacked out. When she woke up, it was morning, but the coldness of the night still lingered in the air, and her body felt heavy, as if weighed down by an invisible force. The room was silent, the sunlight filtering weakly through the windows. She tried to sit up, but when she moved, she felt it pain, sharp and sudden, in her chest. Her hand flew to her neck, and she gasped in horror. There, on her skin, were deep red marks, as if something had gripped her so tightly that it had left permanent bruises, the shape of fingers wrapped around her throat. She had no words to describe what had happened, no way to explain it. The creature, the eyes, the suffocating terror, she was never able to forget it. From that day on, Freya's nights were never the same. She would hear whispers in the dark, feel the air grow cold, and the sound of bare feet dragging across the floor. She knew it was out there, lurking in the shadows, always watching her, waiting for the next time it would come. 4. Night of the Oni. Takeshi, a 45-year-old professor in Kyoto, was an expert in folklore and ancient cultural traditions. His life was grounded in rationality and reason, and he had always dismissed superstitions as mere fabrications. To him, phenomena like sleep paralysis were simply physical reactions, nothing more than the body's way of processing the stress of the day. He had no time for the ghost stories and legends his students would often tell. That was until one night, when his beliefs were shattered in a way that could never be explained away. It was 3 a.m. when Takeshi suddenly woke up, his eyes snapping open in the dead of night. His body felt stiff, completely immobilized. The room was pitch dark, the only sound the distant rustling of wind outside. But there was something wrong, something he couldn't explain. He could feel it. A presence, something was crawling toward him, something unnatural. His heart raced in his chest as he tried to move, but his limbs remained paralyzed, as though they were held by invisible chains. And then, slowly, his eyes adjusted to the dark, and the creeping sensation intensified. He could feel a weight, a pressure, as if something was climbing up from the foot of his bed. Takeshi's breath caught in his throat. A hand appeared, with long black claws curling grotesquely, gripping the edge of the bed. The sight made his blood run cold. It was followed by another hand, and another, and another. 4 hands in total, all creeping up his body like the legs of some enormous, twisted centipede. They moved with a horrifyingly deliberate pace, their claws scraping against the sheets, their grip tightening as they crawled further and further up the bed. Takeshi's eyes widened in terror. The hands seemed to be part of something much larger, something that moved in the shadows like an inhuman entity, pushing against the dark confines of his room. And then, the moonlight suddenly broke through the gap in the curtains, casting a pale, ghostly glow over the room. What Takeshi saw in that fleeting moment would haunt him for the rest of his life. It was a creaturia monsterets body, massive, with skin the color of blood. Its eyes bulged from its face, wide and unblinking, its mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth. The creature's tongue hung low, drooping from its mouth and reaching down to its chest. It had the unmistakable form of an Onya demon from Japanese folklore, its features distorted into something even more grotesque. Its face was dark, almost black, like it had emerged from the depths of hell itself. The creature's grotesque form loomed over Takeshi, its hot breath seeping into his skin. He could feel its presence in the pit of his stomach, like a heavy weight pressing down on him, suffocating him. And then it spoke. Its voice was a low, rasping whisper, like the sound of dry leaves scraping against the ground. The words came slowly, but with an awful certainty. "If you can see me, you are about to die." The words seemed to echo in Takeshi's mind, repeating over and over. The creature's hands continued to crawl up his body, its sharp claws digging into his skin. He wanted to scream, to shout, to escape, but his voice was gone. His body, locked in place, refused to obey. In that moment, Takeshi felt as if he were staring directly into the abyss. The creature's eyes burned into his soul, and the weight of its words pressed down on him like a curse. His heart raced faster, pounding in his chest, and his breath came in short gasps. Then, just as he thought he would suffocate from the terror, a loud crack of thunder split the air, shaking the very walls of the room. The creature's grip loosened, and with that sudden jolt, Takeshi's body was freed from the paralysis. He shot up from the bed, gasping for air, his chest heaving, his heart still racing with fear. But when he looked around the room, it was empty. The moonlight still filtered through the curtains, and the room seemed as still and silent as before. Takeshi quickly turned on the lights, his hands trembling as he tried to steady himself. His body was slick with sweat, his skin clammy with fear. He checked his body, but there were no marks, no signs of the creature's presence and nothing to indicate that what he had just experienced was real, except for the lingering terror that clung to him like a second skin. From that night on, Takeshi never slept alone again. The fear of what he had witnessed haunted him, and every time the lights went out, every time the darkness closed in around him, he felt the creature's presence lurking just beyond the reach of his vision. He had seen the Onith Daimonon, the words it whispered were forever etched into his mind. Takeshi knew that, one day, the creature would return, and when it did, he would not be able to escape. 5. The Phantom Whistle. Lucas, a 30-year-old man, lived in the bustling city of Sao Paulo, Brazil. His life was full of ordinary routines: work, family, friends. But there was one thing he couldn't shake, a story his grandmother used to tell him about. O Asobio Phantasmath, Phantom Whistle. It was a tale his family spoke of in hushed tones, especially when it was dark outside. One evening, after a long day, Lucas returned home to find his apartment unnervingly silent. He shrugged it off, figuring it was just the exhaustion settling in. But as he began to settle on the couch, a strange sound pierced the air, whistling. Soft at first, then growing louder. It seemed to come from nowhere, yet everywhere. A whistle, clear and deliberate, echoing through the walls. Lucas froze. His grandmother's voice echoed in his mind. If you hear the whistle, it's already too late. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the wind or someone outside. But the whistling didn't stop. It grew louder, then softer, then louder again, as if moving through the apartment. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. With every passing moment, the whistle came closer. And then, he saw it. A shadow moved across the wall, just beyond the corner of his eye. He turned quickly, his heart pounding, but there was nothing there. The whistling persisted, growing more insistent. Lucas felt the temperature drop, the air around him turning cold and heavy, as if the very atmosphere was thickening with dread. The whistling stopped suddenly. He stood up, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. But as soon as he turned to leave, a chill ran through him. Standing in the doorway was a figure, tall and cloaked in shadow. Its face was a void black, like a hole that swallowed all light, and in its hand it held an old rusted whistle, the same whistle that had echoed through his apartment. Frozen, Lucas couldn't move. The figure's eyesif, they could even be called, eye stared right through him. It raised the whistle to its lips and blew once more. The sound filled the room with a sharp, piercing note, and then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. The next morning, Lucas woke to find his apartment in complete disarray. The furniture was overturned, the lights flickering. It was as if the room had been turned upside down in the middle of the night. But the most chilling part was the whistly, rusty, old whistle lying on the floor, just inches from his bed. Was it a hallucination? Or had something from the other side really crossed into his world? Conclusion: do we all see the same thing? Across cultures, from Asia to Europe, from century to century, people have described the same terrifying phenomenon. Unable to move, unable to scream, a presence looming at the foot of the bed, and the chilling feeling of being watched. In the realm of science, this experience is known as sleep paralysis. It occurs when the brain wakes up before the body does, leaving you frozen, trapped in a state where your mind is conscious, but your body remains immobile. This is a well-documented physiological response, usually triggered by stress, sleep deprivation, or irregular sleep patterns. As for the strange physical effects, we sometimes wake up to the disarray in the room, burned handprints on our skin, bruises that weren't there before. There's a scientific explanation too. When you experience sleep paralysis, your body is still locked in REM, rapid eye movement, sleep. During this phase, your muscles are paralyzed to prevent you from acting out your dreams. However, this paralysis is not always perfect, and in some cases, the body may inadvertently react to perceived danger. These reactions could explain the bruises, burned marks, and disturbed surroundings. The mind, in its frantic state, could create sensations of contact gripping, slapping, or even burning while the body remains still. But here's the question. Why, despite vast cultural differences and geographical distances, do people describe seeing the same kind of entity? A shadowy figure, a creature standing over them, often with malicious intent. Could it simply be a shared illusion, a trick of the mind under duress, or could it be something more? Some might say it's just a nightmare, a figment of our overactive imaginations. But others, those steeped in ancient belief, might suggest that it's a visit from the other side, a supernatural presence drawn to us when we are most vulnerable. But perhaps there's more to it than that. So, tonight, when the clock strikes 3 a.m., and you wake up in the dark, what will you see standing at the foot of your bed? Let's hope it's not someone from beyond, saying hello in their own way. The world is not always what it seems. If you're ready to keep peeling back the shadows, like, share, and subscribe this video. The truth is just beginning to unfold.